My name is Rachel Turner. I'm 32 years old, and 3 months ago, I inherited my father's house in a quiet town outside Manchester. He passed away suddenly, a heart attack, the doctor said, though something about that explanation never sat right with me. The night before his funeral, I stayed alone in his house for the first time. I told myself I was being sentimental, sleeping in his bed, wrapped in his old wool blanket. But sleep never came properly. Somewhere around 2 a.m., I heard his voice. Not in a dream. Not exactly awake either. Just his voice, low and urgent, the way he used to sound when something had truly frightened him. "Leave that house tonight, Rachel." I sat up so fast my head spun. The room was empty. The door was closed exactly as I'd left it. I told myself it was grief playing tricks, exhaustion twisting my mind into shapes that weren't real. But then I heard it again, closer this time, almost pressed against my ear. "Please, before it's too late." I didn't leave. I couldn't. It was my father's house, my father's bed, and I refused to let fear chase me out of the one place that still smelled like him. But I didn't sleep again that night either. The next morning, going through his study, I found something I'd never noticed before. Behind a bookshelf that seemed strangely angled, there was a door. Small, unmarked, painted the same gray as the wall so it would disappear if you weren't looking closely, locked with no key in sight. I asked my father's longtime solicitor, Mr. Ashworth, about it during the reading of the will. His face changed the moment I mentioned the hidden room. "Rachel," he said carefully, "your father asked me more than once to make sure that room was never opened. He was very specific about it." "Did he say why?" Mr. Ashworth hesitated. Something passed behind his eyes that looked almost like fear. "He said some things are safer left buried. He said if you ever asked, I was to beg you to sell the house instead." I laughed, though nothing about it felt funny. Sell my father's house? Over a locked door? He didn't laugh with me. He simply reached into his briefcase, set an old, unlabeled key on the table between us, and said the words that would keep me awake for the rest of that week. He also said if you insisted, I was to give you this, and to tell you that once you open that door, there is no version of your life that stays the same. I held that key in my palm for 3 days before I found the courage to use it. Every night, my father's voice returned, softer now, almost pleading. "Don't, Rachel. Not that room." But grief has a strange way of turning warnings into invitations. The more he begged me to stay away, the more I needed to know why. On the 4th night, I stood in front of the small gray door with a flashlight, and my hands shaking so badly, I nearly dropped the key twice. The lock was stiff, rusted from years of disuse, but it finally gave way with a groan that echoed through the empty house. The room was smaller than I expected. No windows, dust thick enough to taste, and in the center, a single wooden desk with a lamp that somehow still worked when I pulled the cord. What I found on that desk changed everything I thought I knew about my father. Dozens of photographs carefully organized into folders. Photographs of me, not childhood pictures, not family memories. Recent ones, me leaving my flat in London. Me at the coffee shop I visit every Tuesday morning. Me talking to a man outside my office building I didn't even recognize. Every photograph was time-stamped, some from only weeks before my father died. My hands trembled as I opened the largest folder. Inside was a single sheet of paper in my father's handwriting, dated almost a year earlier. "If you are reading this, it means I couldn't protect you long enough. Rachel, you are in danger, and it isn't from a stranger. It's from someone who has been closer to you than you could ever imagine." I tried to handle this myself. I should have told you the truth from the beginning. Beneath the letter was a name I recognized instantly, circled in red ink so hard it had torn through the paper. Daniel Whitfield, my fiancé, the man I was supposed to marry in 6 weeks. My knees gave out and I sank into my father's chair, staring at photographs of myself that Daniel had apparently been supplying to my own father for months, alongside notes about my schedule, my habits, my routines. Why would my father be collecting information about the man I loved? Unless he wasn't protecting me from a stranger at all? Unless my father had discovered that Daniel was never who he claimed to be. My phone buzzed in my pocket, shattering the silence of that suffocating little room. A text message from Daniel himself, sent at that exact moment, as if he somehow knew precisely where I was standing. "Rachel, we need to talk. Tonight. It's about your father's death, and I think you already know it wasn't a heart attack." I stared at that message until the words blurred together. Daniel's name had never frightened me before. Now it felt like a stranger had typed those words and stolen his face to say them. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I forced myself to keep reading my father's file, my hands cold despite the warmth trapped in that airless little room. Deeper in the folder, I found bank statements that weren't mine, weren't my father's either. Statements belonging to Daniel, showing transfers from an account I'd never heard of, arriving every month from a woman named Victoria Hale. The name meant nothing to me until I found her photograph clipped to the back page. Older, elegant, unmistakably wealthy. My father had written a single line beneath her picture. Daniel's real fiancé before Rachel left him when she discovered what he was planning, now feeding him information to finish what she couldn't. My stomach turned. Daniel had told me he'd never been engaged before me. He'd sworn it, laughing, calling himself hopelessly picky until he met me. Every version of him I'd fallen in love with felt like it was dissolving in my hands. I kept reading. My father had written pages about Daniel's growing debts, a failed business venture 2 years earlier, and one final note that made the room tilt around me. He needs Rachel's trust fund cleared before the wedding. Once they're married, everything transfers automatically. Under the prenup, he insisted she not read carefully. I confronted him 3 weeks ago. He smiled and told me old men shouldn't interfere in things. They don't understand. 3 weeks ago. My father died 4 weeks ago. My phone buzzed again. Daniel, impatient now. Rachel, answer me. I know you found the room. Ashworth called me the moment you asked about the key. My blood went cold. Ashworth, the only person I trusted completely besides my father, had been reporting to Daniel this entire time. I didn't know who else in my life had already been bought or rehearsed or silenced. I typed back with hands that refused to stop shaking. I found everything, Daniel. I know about Victoria. I know about the money. I know what you did to my father. The reply came almost instantly, and it wasn't an apology. It wasn't even a denial. Then you also know it's too late to change anything. The wedding is in 6 weeks, Rachel. Everyone already believes I'm the perfect man for you. Your mother adores me. Your friends envy you. Who exactly do you think they'll believe? A grieving daughter chasing conspiracy theories in her dead father's basement? Or me? I sat there in the dust and the dark, staring at photographs of my own stolen privacy, and I understood with sudden, terrifying clarity that surviving this wasn't going to be enough. I was going to have to outsmart him. I didn't answer Daniel's text again that night. Instead, I sat in my father's chair until sunrise, forcing myself to think like he must have thought in his final weeks. Quietly, carefully, 3 steps ahead of a man who believed he'd already won. The first person I called wasn't Ashworth. It was my father's older brother, my Uncle Peter, a retired detective I hadn't spoken to properly in years. He listened without interrupting as I read him every note from that hidden room, and when I finished, his voice was steady in a way that finally made me feel less alone. Your father came to me 4 months ago, he said quietly. He didn't tell me everything, but he asked me to keep an eye on Daniel's finances. I have documents you haven't even seen yet. By that afternoon, Uncle Peter arrived with a folder of his own. Bank records showing Daniel had already opened a joint investment account in my name, one I'd never signed for, using a signature that was almost, but not quite, mine, forged, prepared for the moment our marriage made everything legally shared. We also found Victoria Hale's real story. She hadn't simply left Daniel. She'd nearly lost everything to him first. An inheritance, a business. 2 years of her life, before escaping with barely enough evidence to protect herself. When Uncle Peter reached her, she agreed to meet, still furious, still frightened, but finally ready to speak the truth out loud. That evening, I texted Daniel back, calm, controlled, giving him nothing. You're right. It's too late to change the wedding. I'll see you there. His reply came fast, relieved, almost triumphant. That's my girl. I knew you'd understand eventually. He had no idea I meant something entirely different. Over the next 5 weeks, while Daniel planned centerpieces and rehearsed vows he didn't believe, Uncle Peter and Ashworth's own guilt-ridden assistant helped me quietly gather everything. Recorded calls, financial documents, Victoria's sworn statement, even security footage from a hardware store near my father's house. Time-stamped the same week Daniel claimed to be traveling for work. The same week my father's heart, according to a private toxicology report Peter finally requested, showed traces of a substance no healthy 60-year-old man should have had in his blood. My father hadn't simply died of a broken heart. He'd been silenced. The morning of my wedding, I stood in front of the mirror in my gown, Victoria's statement folded inside my bouquet, Uncle Peter waiting outside with 2 officers he'd trusted for 20 years. And I whispered a promise to my father that I intended to keep completely. I'm not walking down that aisle to marry him. Dad, I'm walking down there to finish what you started. The chapel was full by the time I arrived. White flowers, soft music, 200 guests smiling at a wedding that was never going to happen. Daniel stood at the altar, adjusting his cufflinks, so certain of his victory that he didn't even glance nervously at the door the way most grooms do. I walked down the aisle exactly as rehearsed, my bouquet trembling slightly in my hands, though not from fear anymore. When I reached him, he reached for my fingers and whispered, "You look beautiful, Rachel." "Thank you," I said softly. "You should know exactly what you're marrying." His smile faltered for half a second before the officiant began. "If anyone has reason why this couple should not be joined in marriage, speak now." I raised my hand. "I do." Gas rippled through the chapel. Daniel forced a laugh. "Rachel, what are you doing?" I turned to face our guest instead of him. 6 weeks ago, I found a locked room in my father's house. Inside it was proof that my fiancé forged my signature on a joint account, funneled my father's information to his own ex-fiancée, and confronted my father when he discovered the truth. Daniel's face drained of color. "This is insane. Everyone, she's grieving, she's confused." "I'm not finished." I nodded toward the back of the chapel, where Uncle Peter stood beside Victoria Hale and 2 uniformed officers. Victoria stepped forward, her voice shaking but clear. "He did the same thing to me. I barely escaped with my life savings intact." The officers moved forward. "Daniel Whitfield, we need you to come with us regarding an ongoing investigation into the death of Robert Turner." Daniel lunged toward me, gripping my wrist. "You don't understand what you're throwing away." "No," I said, pulling free. "I finally understand exactly what I almost married." He was escorted out through a side door as guests whispered in stunned silence, his mother sobbing quietly in the second row, unable to meet anyone's eyes. 3 months later, the toxicology evidence, combined with Victoria's testimony and Uncle Peter's financial records, was enough for formal charges. Daniel is still awaiting trial. Some days I feel rage. Other days, only exhausted relief that I listened to a voice I couldn't explain, in a house I almost sold out of fear. I restored my father's study instead of avoiding it. The hidden room stays unlocked now, sunlight pouring through a small window I finally had installed. Sometimes I sit in his old chair and simply say thank you out loud, to a father who protected me even after he no longer could. People ask if I regret opening that door. I tell them the truth. That door didn't destroy my life. It saved it.